I came across the graphic novel Vanni purely by chance in our local public library here in Washington, D.C. And because it happened to mention that it was about Sri Lanka, where we lived for 3 years, I thought I would give it a read. And I would say it's probably the best graphic novel I have ever read. Vanni refers to the region in the north of Sri Lanka where much of the conflict recorded in this graphic novel occurs. The story was researched and written by Benjamin Dix, who was a member of the UN peacekeeping forces in Sri Lanka before they were asked to leave during the conflict by the Sri Lankan government. And Lindsay Pollock is the person who scripted it and illustrated the graphic novel. The story of this late stage of the conflict is told through the eyes of two families shown here and here. The conflict lasted from 1983 to 2009. This graphic novel focuses on the last part of the conflict when it became particularly brutal. We see in the graphic novel the first disaster that these civilians faced, which was the tsunami in 2004, which killed quite a few people in Sri Lanka and displaced them, forcing them into camps. The UN came into the country to administer and help the people in those camps, and so they were present during the intensification of the conflict between the Tamil Tigers and the government. We get that narrative and we see it specifically through the eyes of these families who are in the north, and so they encounter the Tamil Tigers. Their children variously become involved with the Tamil Tigers or are coerced, forced into the Tamil Tigers. And we see how war impacts the combatants as well as the civilians. Because the Tamil Tigers are in among the civilians and in some ways are using the civilians as a shield, the government attack areas where the civilians are, and the civilians suffer terrible consequences as a result. And we get to see that through the losses that the families suffer. There are a small number of informational pages where the authors record the migration of the civilians during the conflict and how they are moved from no-fire zones to no-fire zones, where they're allegedly going to be safe, and they're gradually forced into smaller and smaller areas along the coast, where the Tamil Tigers join them to protect themselves from the government, who are obviously much better equipped, more powerful, more capable of executing a war. And it becomes a disaster because the civilians are highly concentrated in this no-fire zone. When the government attack it, they suffer proportionately. We see that suffering in these pages. We're not spared the suffering, nor should we be, because the point of this book is the effect of war on civilians, and that's the importance of this book. It's not just something which is relevant to the civil war in Sri Lanka, but it's relevant to all wars. The people who suffer the most are the civilian populations. Soldiers of both sides committed atrocities upon the civilian populations, and we get to see that in the graphic novel. And finally, we end up in this enormous camp. It was allegedly one of the biggest such refugee camps on the surface of the planet at that time. And when you think that things might not get worse, they get worse, and we get to see some of the torture that was carried out to try and find and track down Tamil collaborators and the Tamil fighters themselves. Lindsay Pollock's art style is charmingly naive. It's all solid lines and washes, and it invites you into the story at the beginning and then acts as a strong counterpoint later on when the situation gets particularly grim. I should also mention that according to the authors, the stories are based on eyewitness accounts of what happened during the conflict, which makes it even more poignant. Most important of all, though, is how well the stories of the families are told and how engaged you become with the individual family members and their fates throughout this terrible conflict. That's what drew me through the novel all the way to the end.